Well, folks, thanks for tuning in. The United States has just claimed another part of the world as their territory. You want to hear about that right now? And the largest publication in the trans community, the transgender community, has just taken a step back and surprised people. And wait till I tell you what your kids might be buying right now on TikTok. Thanks for tuning in here at stockwellday.com, day to day news. Let's jump right into it. Iran, their foreign minister, deputy foreign minister, a gentleman by the name of Kazem Garibabadi, if I got that right, has just said that the US and President Trump is in fact delusional. And the reason they're saying that is because the White House, the United States, Donald Trump, the president, has just claimed the Strait of Hormuz as US territory. They've just claimed it as U.S. territory. This is a lot more than just saying the Gulf of Mexico is now going to be called the Gulf of America. This is going to be hugely contested, obviously, but it's a signal that the U.S. is about to get more aggressive on the Strait of Hormuz because Iran, of course, is not taking any steps to agree to stop their nuclear program and to open up the strait. So let's watch as that happens. There's another deadline facing the US, and it's to do with Canada, because at midnight tonight or at 12:01 a.m. tomorrow morning, you're going to see, unless something happens in the next few hours, there will be the implementation of massive tariffs against Canadian goods. It's huge, 50% on metals, on minerals, on agriculture products, on 10% on forestry products. It goes on and on. It's gigantic. If it kicks in, there is going to be just a dramatic effect economically on Canada. I think there's some things that Canadian negotiators need to be reading and seeing between the lines. For instance, just today, the US has dropped a ton of tariffs that they had against Syria. Now, you might be saying, well, what's that to do with Syria? Doesn't sound too serious, but it's quite interesting, because Syria has made an agreement to back off considerably and to drop certain claims relative to the battles they've been fighting in the Middle East. And so, in a nod of appreciation for that, the U.S. has dropped significant sanctions. One thing that we know that the U.S. is, and I can understand this, concerned about is sovereign, not just sovereignty, but a matter of fact, protection of their northern border, protection of the Arctic border. They've been trying to get firm agreements from Canada in terms of participating into the protective dome, which would give a shield that would protect Canada and the US from ballistic missiles coming over the North Pole, a similar system that's in place very successfully in Israel, for instance. And Canada's still playing footsies on that. This is insanity. It is diplomatic insanity to be playing footsies with the US and saying, well, we don't know if we want to take be a part of the dome, a protective dome, which will be largely paid for by the US. Canada and its prime minister need to give their heads a shake on this, and also the ongoing push of all things Canada into the arms of China, while China, as we know, is assisting, or does assist, North Korea. China assisting Russia in terms of killing Ukrainians. China assisting Iran. We know this is true. So here we are with our government snuggling us up to an avowed enemy of the United States and of Ukraine and of Taiwan, and we're snuggling closer to them because we want to keep our polling numbers up among Canadians who just don't understand the issue and think it's so smart to do thumbs up and nose up to the US on vital areas of security that would be beneficial both to Canada and the US. Let's hope something happens before midnight, that there's some kind of a wake-up call. And I repeat, I oppose tariffs. I, as a minister, foreign minister of international trade for Canada, I always have opposed tariffs. That's not the issue here. The issue is getting smart and doing what's best for Canada. We are going to see what will happen here. Also, the articles continue, that article out today saying, well, if in fact Canada does get hit with the 50% tariffs, this would be a great initiative, a great incentive for provincial premiers to drop the tariffs that they have against each other with so many products, whether it's wine products or different agriculture products. This is the great conceit, the great hypocrisy among Canadian negotiating and the Canadian view of the US relationship. We are aghast and in horror, as we should be, about the US tariffs. At the same time, we allow premiers to tariff themselves and beat up on each other's workers the same way we say it's so wrong for Trump to do it with us. When I was Minister of International Trade, I can tell you it was very difficult dealing with countries like New Zealand because they dropped all of their tax subsidies. This is way back in the 80s. They dropped their tax subsidies for agriculture. As we know, and as we've said here on this show, anytime government gets involved and subsidizes any product, it will eventually keep going up, whether you're talking about a particular food product, whether you're talking about a metal product, or whether you're talking about rent control. Anytime governments get involved just to try and selfishly squeak some votes from people who don't know any better and impose tariffs and subsidies, the cost goes up. New Zealand got rid of theirs, and New Zealand and Australia to the same degree. Both those countries eventually became very competitive in agriculture. Their farmers and their entrepreneurs and the people in the supply chain were able to freely work entrepreneurial to keep costs down and keep quality up. This is insane policy that is being pursued by the federal government, continuing to want to involve themselves in so many different ways, and the interprovincial trade barriers we have between provinces are one of the great hypocrisies. Russia is getting nervous as the government there, as it should be. There's items in the Washington Post today talking about more and more Russians are withdrawing their own money that they have in their own bank accounts. Once people start mass withdrawal of money, and that means an economy can be on the verge of collapse. So you heard it right here. I would say, watch now. You will see Putin do something to make it more difficult for Russians to be drawing their money out of their own banks. It's a sure sign that things might be coming to an end, or they might be getting more desperate in Russia. Well, if you're worried about everything that's happening in terms of internet and how we're overwhelmed with it, and AI and all of this type of thing, OpenAI, Gemini, Grok, very interesting stats that have just come out. And it's the survey, scientific, I will say, survey of all the major AI companies show that more and more people are using AI not for work, but for they're developing very serious relationships with their AI bot, with their AI assistant across the board, whether it's OpenAI, Gemini, or Grok. 48% of people that are using AI are in relationships, romantic or otherwise, with their AI assistant. You can decide whether that's a good thing or not. Well, talking about being in a relationship, New York Post has an article, and it's also reflected in some Canadian articles here, that COVID went a long way to creating a situation where more and more Gen Z, especially, will go a whole day and have zero face-to-face relationships or interactions with other people, even their own family. Before COVID hit, the survey showed that it was something less than 3% of Gen Z were saying they had no other face-to-face relationships. After COVID, and even continuing today, 10% of all Gen Z, that's millions of young people, are glued to their devices with no other face-to-face relationship. That is worrisome, folks. You can thank COVID for that. The trade situation in Canada, as we just talked about, there's an interesting development on the US side where the Ford Motor Company, has just announced that beginning in 2030, one of their most lucrative lines of vehicle, the Ford Lincoln, They are going to be making entirely in the United States. They'll be taking no more imports from China related to any of their luxury brands. This is going to bring jobs back to the US. This is going to reinvigorate a lot of the automobile production in the US. And people are waiting to see if Ford is going to announce that for other models also. Is this just the start of things to come, where Ford will be pulling back more and more from taking anything from China? We'll see where that goes. And again, contrast this with Canada, where our government is intent on drawing closer to China. We are bringing in 50,000 Chinese EVs, electric vehicles, in the very near future, vehicles which we've already been told will not be allowed to cross the US border. Folks, we've got to call your MP and just ask her or him, please, to tell the Prime Minister, give the head a shake, stop the cheap vote getting by thinking that somehow we can just infuriate the US, especially on things like security, and pursue closer to China. That's a big cause of concern. Again, we look at um, some of the pressures that are coming on our kids. I just want to jump back to this AI thing for a minute here. OpenAI, which is ChatGPT, has announced that they are coming up with an entire portal, an entire platform dedicated to 13 to 17-year-olds with full parental control and giving realistic guides into how to help kids learn and do their homework, and without just giving them the answers directly. So hearing the pressures there, some of these AI companies are responding to concerns relative to the effect on kids. We'll see if that just continues developing. There's an insane, I'm going to use the word insane here, ruling that's come out of the Nova Scotia Court of Appeals. There's a situation there where a guy wanted to be getting welfare, and I call this passive welfare. We're not talking about somebody deemed incapable of working or temporarily incapacitated, but here is a healthy individual, and he went to court, won at the Nova Scotia Court of Appeal, to have his tent declared an actual place of residence so that he can collect more welfare, as somebody would if they were living in a small apartment. They collect welfare for themselves and their own food, of course, and also to cover the costs of the apartment. And now a tent has been declared a domicile. Folks, these type of insane rulings completely ignore and deny human nature. Human nature, generally speaking, is we love free stuff. And as you give, and I found this out as Minister of Social Services, when I was Minister of Social Services in Alberta, when you give free stuff to people, I'm not talking about those desperately, truly in need of a bridge of some kind. I'm talking about more and more huge percentage increase over the years of people who just are getting free welfare. They're really not pursuing work or education alternatives. This will only increase. Watch Nova Scotia. Watch Nova Scotia. So-called homelessness will increase. Problem on the streets will increase. Tent encampments will increase. And legal activists, lawyers now, on behalf of the so-called homeless, will be pursuing this aggressively. Tell your politicians not to do this. And folks, if the political party in your province or your state or your country is pursuing this type of free and passive welfare, and especially insane rulings like declaring a tent as a domicile, you need to stop voting for them. If they don't tell you they're going to change it, you need to stop voting for them. It can be done. We can turn the tide of the destruction of an entire generation by giving them free stuff, but we've got to start standing up. We've got to start only voting for politicians who are talking in that direction. The trans issue took a real major eye-opener just yesterday when the largest mouthpiece or organ of the trans community, so-called the scientific community that represents trans issues, they're called WPATH, and that's the name of the organization. They have always maintained that everything about trans research is scientific. And yesterday, in a huge a huge step down from this. They say much of this is actually opinion. It's opinion based on how they are viewing science. It is not science. Maybe it's because when they see the reaction, as we saw just last week with the president of a major university in California saying men could in fact get pregnant. Maybe it's the type of insanity that we are seeing um, in the sports world and in the athletic world uh, that has caused people to take a step back. But now they are saying this is the trans organization itself saying these are opinions. We look at the science; these are opinions. Parents, don't take as fact what so many teachers are telling you that your kids were born in the wrong body, and then that at 3 years old they know what kind of body they should be in. Don't take that. Follow the line, and politicians should be following the line. For instance, the province of Alberta in Canada, the premier there has said there will be no transing of kids. The premier has said adults certainly have the right to pursue what they want with their bodies, but there will be no surgical alteration or chemical alteration of kids. More and more jurisdictions are doing that. Time to wake up, folks. At a Just to show how crazy this is, of course, as the debate rages on in the Women's Basketball League, the WNBA, two fans at a game just on Sunday. This is a game between the Indiana Fever and the Atlanta Dream. I believe that's what they're called. Two of the fans, there's thousands of fans sitting there. Two of them are wearing these jerseys that said XX is not equal to XY. Now, for those of you who may not know, XX represents the female chromosome. XY represents the male chromosome. They are very distinct. They cannot be changed. I don't care how many operations or how many genital disfigurations you've gone through, your chromosomes cannot be changed. And the shirts they had on simply said XX is not equal to XY, or is not the same as XY. And they were dragged away by security guards, and they had to put on, the only reason they put on other shirts to cover it was because they wanted to get back and see the final 2 minutes of the game. Apparently, they are taking some legal action against, insanity rules supreme on some of these things, and we don't speak up against them. We all start to get crazy in the head. Actually, there's a very interesting verse that was written by Paul the Apostle way back over 2,000 years ago. He looked at some of these trends that were happening even then in society, and he said, you know what? Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. Folks, don't become fools over this. Well, Rolling Stone magazine has an article out talking about another Gen Z trend recently. More and more Gen Zs are, guess what they're buying on TikTok? Diamonds. They're buying diamonds on TikTok. Now, before parents get terrified and think that their kids are spending thousands, there's a huge market for diamonds that are lab grown. I think you're probably aware of this. If you're not, these are synthetic diamonds. They look as beautiful as the real ones. They have, over the last decade or so, been picking up, not in terms necessarily of value, but in terms of popularity, because they don't have to be mined. So people who have environmental concerns, even though those environmental concerns are over amped, they are buying these, and it's in the diamonds they're buying are sort of in the $60 to $100 American, but they're Gen Z, an increasing number of them fascinated by diamonds and snapping them up on TikTok. Well, there's in terms of haircut trends for guys, this being reported in GQ magazine. The warrior cut is back. The warrior cut, and you've probably noticed it. I certainly have. This goes way back to the look that Brad Pitt was showing off in the Fight Club, if you remember that movie that really took off. And it's sort of a kind of a rough and ragged look haircut. It's actually very carefully done and planned, but it's to try and appear that there wasn't much effort put into it. Kind of a shaggier look, medium length. That's what's happening, folks. Warrior cut coming way back in, and the so-called broccoli cut, where it's kind of tight, curled on the top of the forehead, maybe sliding out a little bit. A couple of faith-based items that are very interesting. As a member of Parliament in Canada is going to be on a radio show today, and he's going to be talking about specifically about his faith. You don't hear that a lot in Canadian politics, but Richard Bragdon, Member of Parliament. I know Richard, actually, he's a great guy. He's going to be at 96.5 Joy FM for anybody who's listening to that in Canada or around the world. Mark Wahlberg, of course, we know of him, certainly related to faith-based issues. His brother Donnie. Now, Donnie was in, if any of you watched or still watch the reruns or the new runs of New Kids on the Block, or if you remember the show Blue Bloods, and I think it's still showing on many platforms, has just done an interview and talked about how he is getting his life back on track. He's returned to faith. He said, "I was empty without him," referring to Christ, and he said he's getting things back on track. Kind of bold of these Hollywood types to do it, but there you go. Some of the things that are happening today. Thanks for tuning in. See you tomorrow.